Welcome to the Everything is Final Fantasy podcast. I'm Drew Kreisman.
And I'm Ira Kreisman.
And on this episode, we continue our conversation on Final Fantasy VIII. When last we left our heroes, our two main plots were coming together. Squall and company were meeting Laguna and company. And it's giving us shivers and feel-goods and all kinds of fun aha moments. Hey, that guy from the thing, from the stuff, and his two buddies. Hooray! So that's what we were doing. Now, we've got a lot to unpack in what happens next, including the way that it happens, Ira, because I don't know if it was after this entirely, but certainly in my recollection, a lot of RPGs would become kind of infamous for late game exposition dumps. And what we are about to get is a late game exposition dump. I think Chrono Cross also, without giving too much away, came under fire for a little bit of this. And without belaboring the point too much, because I think we've made it throughout this series of episodes, I think what happens here is both a strength and weakness of Final Fantasy VIII, which is what makes this game so weird and both lovable and sometimes kind of frustrating. Because there's a lot of cool, weird, different ideas that are presented and talked about here. Having all of it thrown at you in this way, and with these two characters, Laguna and Dr. Odine, just kind of throwing information at you, is a bit overwhelming, I think. And if I were remaking Final Fantasy VIII, something that we've talked a lot about with other games and hinted at, but this is one thing where I really think a lot of this stuff would have been better off shown, not told, and would be better in a bigger, longer, Rebirth was 100+ hours for reasons that I think were really good ones, and I think you could do a lot with an extra 40 hours of lore development and history and just more time with Laguna and friends,
Sure, yeah.
But what we get is this.
Yeah, and I don't think it's any weirder or more abrupt than a 2,000-year time loop.
Sure. No, it's
right?
not.
But I would like a little more definition of what it means to be a sorceress and what it means to inherit powers. We could have spent more time in the Sorceress War.
Right.
And had some of that explained. But again, as we've talked about, our heroes don't know this until now.
Right.
So that we don't know either is maybe part of the point.
Right, which I do appreciate. I just think, now would have been time for maybe a good long series of flashbacks in several scenes instead of, again, what we get is this thing that Final Fantasy VIII does where you can just ask a series of questions.
Right, yep. When it could have been playable flashbacks.
Right. But I also understand, it was a PlayStation 1 game and it was big for its time too, so I'm asking for a lot of things that were probably not possible.
There were computer memory issues.
Indeed. There's 4 discs for this game.
It could have been 7.
Yeah, right. I do like the introduction to the series of questions, which is that Laguna says to Squall, "Man, you look way too serious." And Squall responds, "Whatever."
I like that they're asking for an explanation, and Kiro says, actually, if you let President Laguna start talking, he will never stop. So instead, ask a few questions, and we're going to wrap this up quick. He starts by roasting him, of course.
It feels deliberate at times, but their polar opposite personalities always makes me laugh.
Yeah, I mean, he's the president of Esthar, and he's there in, a loose ponytail, and his shirt's not buttoned all the way up, and I'm pretty sure he's wearing sandals.
Right.
And Squall is... Squall's not in his uniform, but he's definitely in, his uniform. Yeah. He's not in the garden uniform. But it's still kind of a buttoned-up look.
Right. And so, the topics available to you are: explain the mission to defeat Ultimecia. 1. 2. Where's Ellone? 3. Tell me about Rain. 4. What are you doing here? And then the 5th one is, let me out of this. So, despite the fact that they're presented in that way, because the last two questions are about the past, and the first two are about what happens next. We're going to take them in reverse order, which is, there's a certain irony in time compression, and we've talked about it enough, but every time we get a little wibbly-wobbly with the time and how we talk about this, it's kind of fun. So the first question we're going to tackle is, what are you doing here? To which Laguna basically replies, you know what I'm doing here. You know what I've been doing all my life, don't you? Like, oh, right, I guess we have been kind of dream spying on you?
I like that Squall here calls him a silly Galbadian soldier and that he didn't like his attitude.
Yeah.
Again, that's back to the dichotomy between the two. But he does say, and I love this, that he understood the bond between the three of them, him, Kiros, and Ward, because he has now developed that with his fellow seeds, his fellow soldiers, guns for hire, whips for hire, whatever.
Right.
Weapon they happen to wield. So I really like that he appreciates the bond even though he thinks Laguna's kind of a dork.
I love that he gives us another previously on also. he recaps everything. Every time a Final Fantasy character does one of these, I want Barrett from the original 7 to pop up and just with the, I've been here from the beginning and I don't understand what's going on either.
Yeah, absolutely. Squall recaps, and Laguna's like, I got a lot of help along the way, which is, again, very important for a Final Fantasy because of that found family aspect. And then Squall says, what I don't understand is, why are you the president? And quite honestly, that's my question also. So Laguna reiterates that he was out to rescue Ellone, right? He got back to Windhill, Ellone was gone, so he goes to find her. And so he's in these movies, and he's writing all these articles to fund his cross-country world hopping tour to find Ellone. I also like that he calls, so he says, eventually he found her in Esthar, a country ruled by Sorceress Adele with the ingenious yet inhumane Odine.
Yeah. Odine is another character that I wish, there was a bit more of an explanation about, why this guy's not in jail with everything we're about to get to, and then it's... Yeah, again, could be fleshed out more, but I don't want to belabor that point. But they do mention that he's basically a scientific genius who was perfectly fine doing whatever. And we've met several of those throughout Final Fantasy, the last two being Hojo and Cid from 7 and 6, which are not the same level of evil, and so I guess neither is Odine, and that's a weird spectrum to think about. There's a top 10 list for the YouTube page, the mad scientists, yeah.
Uh-huh. And so we flash back to Odine's, I think he calls it the O-Lab. He named it after himself.
Yeah.
So remember Laguna, Kiros, and Ward had just been freed from slavery in the lab and by the resistance. And so they explained that one of the things Odine was working on was a device to seal away magic. And so Laguna figures out a way to seal away, to sort of trick Adele. We're going to figure out a way to trick Adele and get her in there. So first they get the crystal pillar.
Right.
Because that could summon a bunch of monsters. Again, here's something I'd forgotten. Did we know that the crystal pillar had summoned a bunch of monsters to the continent of Centra, and that's why it's all in ruins?
Yeah, I don't know if we had gotten that before this. Again, maybe it's something that's mentioned through NPC dialogue earlier in the game, but if you haven't been doing all of that, this is probably the first time you hear about it. I also love that they kind of trick this all-powerful sorceress with the tactic of, hey, look, a distraction.
Right, exactly. So they set up, so first of all, they drop the crystal pillar, which I think is also the lunatic Pandora,
right, in
the ocean, in order to draw Adele out, and then it's like, oh, the person responsible is inside, and it's a hologram of Ellone in the sealing device, the magic sealing device that we just rescued Renoa from.
Right.
And Adele turns around and looks and says, did you really think I'd be tricked by that? And Laguna's like, shove.
Yeah.
And just
yep. Straight up. Your shoes are untied. Badoosh.
And somebody hits the transporter button. Miles O'Brien is there and hits the transporter button. And Adele is now in the tomb that they're going to launch into space here in a minute.
Right. So now we know how she got there.
And we get a cool cutscene of the Ragnarok, except there's 4 of them, and they all go up that space ramp to take the tomb up into space, and that I think is really cool.
Yeah, that's one of those things that isn't really explained that I like. Sometimes when you just show, I was like, oh, there used to be 4 spaceships that kind of looked like that, and now there's only 1 remaining, but it also explains why there was 1 just kind of floating out there in space. And it also quadruples the absolutely absurd unlikelihood that we would randomly run into one.
Right.
It takes it from 1 in several quadrillion to 4 in several quadrillion, but whatever.
Something else I want to do is take a moment to talk about Adele.
Not the singer, right? Because that would be a weird transition for this podcast. I mean, if you want to, but...
The Sorceress Adele.
Sure.
Who is intense looking.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, the first time we fully see her face on, because we saw her in the tomb and it was all kind of frosted and hard to see. She's got pale skin, almost Genova looking, sort of the pale lavender with maybe tattoos, markings all over her body, bright red eyes, bright red hair. Often goes around shirtless, bare torso, but I mean, she's constantly referred to as her.
Right.
In the feminine.
Yes.
But she doesn't have a terribly feminine body, as I understand it. So I don't know. Maybe this is a transgender character. Maybe there's a translation issue. Is she meant to be beyond, transhuman? Is she meant to be past that? I'm not sure. But a real intense, almost demon-looking woman.
Yeah, when we were doing our series on some of the more, I guess, obvious LGBTQ plus characters in the franchise, I had a few people hit us up on the social media and say, Sorceress Adele is an interesting one to look at. And again, because I feel like we don't know much about the character, it was tough to make that argument, with any kind of certitude. But I suppose to some extent, just looking at the character design is fascinating. And when we talk about androgynous characters throughout Final Fantasy history, it tends to be with the men who are a bit more effeminate. Mm-hmm. And so perhaps this is just a more masculine woman. Perhaps, as you said, there is something more transgendered or transsexual going on here. As we often say with these conversations, one of the nice things is it probably doesn't matter what the sexual preferences of the all-powerful sorceress, are.
Yeah.
Or the identity, it matters to them. I do think this would be a great character that, again, in our remake, we would do away with any gendered nouns because there's simply no reason for that.
Well, but at the same time, only girls are searched for, right?
Yes, unless in order to be a sorceress, which would be an interesting thing, gendered. We talked about it with the orcs in Lord of the Rings, having entire races be bad. I keep bringing up Next Gen, and you did a minute ago. So the Ferengi, that's kind of rough. There's an entire race of capitalist bastards. Every one of them. And so on the one hand, that can be iffy and problematic. On the other hand, there can be certain things that just are passed through generations in certain ways through society or whatever. I don't know. I don't know which way is better or worse, but it's a phenomenal and interesting character design. Yeah,
she looks incredible and intense and intimidating, and that's probably what's most important. I do worry a little bit about making, if she is transgender, then she's the only transgender character in the story, and to then have that be your villain is a bit. We've talked about that before, with Nanaki and representation and stuff.
Right.
So, again, not sure how qualified I am to speak on it, but it is just a really cool character design.
Yeah.
So then Laguna gets into, I rescued essentially the nation and the world from Adele, and so He says, I wasn't paying close attention while they made me up to be this hero of the revolution, and I ended up being president. Whoopsie.
Oh, oops.
There's this bit where where he talks about Odine still wanted to do research on Ellone, but he sent Ellone back to Rain. Like, no, we're not doing that. In fact, as he's explaining this, it shows in a flashback Laguna and Odine arguing, and then Ward gets right in Odine's face.
Yeah.
And starts chasing him around the room, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But then we get back to the fate of Rain. It was a mistake to send Ellone back to Rain. Rain died, and Elle was sent to the orphanage. If I had only gone to Windhill with Elle, I would have been able to see Rain one last time. So now we're back to Ellone's explanation of how Rain died
right
after giving birth to a child, and the only person we know of who Rain had relations with is Laguna. So presumably whomever that baby might be is also Laguna's baby.
It's actually all there for you to put together, and I don't know to what extent they wanted to keep it a mystery. They wanted you to figure it out. Again, I feel like it's a little bit clunky. I do feel like it becomes clear. I guess at this point, if you know, you know. Do we just say, is now the time?
Now's the time.
Okay.
Let's do it.
We're at the end of it. We're very near the end of this story. This is really at the point where you can put the pieces together and say, oh, Laguna is Squall's father. By deductive reasoning, that has to be the case.
Right.
Again, like I said, it's not necessarily clear. I think it becomes a little bit clearer in a conversation that happens a little bit later. But that just makes all of their personality differences that much more interesting. And is something that isn't dived into much deeper that I actually do appreciate. That it's just kind of left there. I don't know. I don't know what a scene with these two characters doing the, oh, son, oh, father, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what that looks like. Squall,
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not even sure that's the interaction I want. What I think... Because if Laguna is Squall's father, then Rain is his mother. And there is a moment when you go to that inn in Windhill and Rain's not there, but those white flowers are, and there's sort of a moment.
Yeah.
And I almost would prefer him have that moment with her instead.
Sure.
Because she's not around anymore. And so...
Yeah.
Well... Yeah, I'm not, like, I don't have a strong resolution there. I don't think it's, I kind of like that it remains largely unresolved.
Yeah.
Just because a lot of this story is about issues with memory and pushing for the future.
Right.
But right now we've got to do a thing.
Right.
And I've made that point over and over. So, well, also I think it's interesting that her name is Rain and his name is Squall.
Yeah.
More weather, sky references.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this is an interesting, subtle way to do that revelation of Squall's parentage and why he ended up in the orphanage with his big sis.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, Squall also wants to ask more about Rain, but this is where Laguna just doesn't want to talk about it, and you can kind of understand. I'm also not sure that Laguna knows or has any reason to believe that Squall, again, he doesn't know anything, so maybe if he did, this would be the time he would say, let me tell you about this woman, Rain, or maybe even let me tell you about your mother, and that can be the conversation that they have. That they don't, I'm fine with, but I agree it would be interesting to hear it out. So then what about the other person in this family that we're not quite admitting exists?
Laguna explains the history of Ellone. So when she was about 2, there was a massive hunt for girls in Esthar. And now I'm thinking about story like the biblical story of killing all the firstborn in Egypt.
Yeah. Doesn't something like that happen in Wheel of Time?
Once they know the dragon has been reborn, there's a massive search for the baby, but nobody knows where it's born except for 2 people who witnessed the prophecy,
right,
et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
They're searching everywhere. They're looking for a successor for Sorceress Adele, and when they came to Windhill, Ellone's parents resisted, and so they were killed, murdered for their child. And I assume that's why there's all those bullet holes all over Windhill, in that one house in particular.
Right.
But Ellone manages to escape. She's taken in by Rain, who's the next door neighbor, and essentially adopted. And then Laguna shows up. She rescues him also and nurses him back to health. We've already gotten that story.
Right.
And that's how he comes to know Ellone and how he falls in love with Rain. And then the soldiers came again. How old is Ellone by then? 5 or 6. So a few years later. And even though he was there, even though Laguna was there, he was not able to stop them. So he explains when he did finally find her, as we just explained, sent her home, Rain died, and Ellone was sent to an orphanage. What he doesn't say here is that the newborn baby was also sent to an orphanage.
Right.
So why didn't you go back to Windhill with her? Squall demands, which I think is a fair question.
Yeah.
And of course he wanted to, but now he's the president of this place and he's got responsibilities.
Right.
Here's something I would like to see in a remake or a retelling is I feel like Sid and Adia Kramer could have had some interaction with President Laguna Lori.
Yeah, I would like to have seen that.
He does explain that he knew the Kramers had taken her in because the Kramers ran the orphanage. Does he know about their secret plan to fight sorceresses?
Right.
That's what I kind of... I've said before that I didn't understand what Sid and Adia's plan was, that it probably was more Adia's plan than Sid's.
Yeah.
But if there had been like a little more interaction amongst them, a little more cooperation between them, even if he felt like he couldn't leave Esthar.
Yeah.
And I understand we can't do radio waves, and so you can't like zoom in and see his adoptive niece/daughter alone. But yeah, I would have liked something there. But anyway, so then they explain that because of her special power, the Kramers felt like they had to send Ellone away. So with all the funding they got from Norg, they put together that white ship, and then she lived there for 10 years and she took care of more orphans. Right. She said she enjoyed it, and then she grew up, and then she followed him to space.
Right, and then started giving people dreams. You know all those parts.
Right, and then coming back from space, Ellone was captured and is now aboard the lunatic Pandora.
And that really does bring us up to everybody cut to Doctor Strange, our setup for the end game. We get now from Dr. Odine a very long explanation that we're going to spare you reading all of, especially because the way it's written, we'd have to try to read it with his weird accent, which is not entirely clear. Right. But this is where we get the clearest, the longest, certainly, explanation of what the big picture thing is here. The mission to defeat Ultimecia. It's reiterated this is a sorceress from the future, and that she's trying to use something called time compression. We've heard that word before. And we've heard that it's a space where only she can exist, or a time, I suppose, where a place that I don't know, where only she can exist. But the long and short of it is that she has got to use these sorceresses from the past, and that in particular, and Ira, maybe we need to slow down a little bit here when we talk about Ellone's part in it. But we'll put that aside for just a second and just say that the idea is that we're going to use Rinoa as a kind of counter vessel so that when Ultimecia tries to possess her, instead we're going to use time compression to bring the past, the present, and the future all to one place so that we can actually confront this sorceress of the future and defeat her. Bunch of weirdness in there. And if you're super into some of the details, it's kind of fun, but it's pretty funky.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it gets back to the succession and the inheriting of powers.
Yeah.
Sorceress powers. Because the first part of the plan is kill Adele. Actually, the first part of the plan is rescue Ellone.
Right.
But we've got to kill Adele so that she cannot take on the powers. The only person who will be available to take on the powers is Rinoa.
Right.
When Ultimecia comes back in time. Using a machine invented by Dr. Odine, but refined over centuries to wherever she is now in the far future.
Right.
Based upon Ellone's brainwaves.
Sure. Well, I do kind of like that bit that there's this machine that he invented that's been perfected in the future, and that somehow we have to use. Again, some of the timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly mumbo-jumbo of it all is pretty fun, but there's so much of it. Again, you've got this machine, you've got the idea of time compression, you've got us making the past, present, and future all one thing so that we can...
Well, and they're kind of tricking Ultimecia into doing it. Because it's get her consciousness into Rinoa's body, have Ellone take Rinoa to the past, and now Ultimecia is in both places, and now she can do time compression, but we're going to use that to get to her and take him down, take him out.
Sure.
Do the thing.
Right. She's going to open a wormhole, and we're going to go through the wormhole.
Right. And I like that they say that is Ultimecia's world, because there's this concept in time travel stories. I'm sure this comes from a very famous short story. I just don't know off the top of my head. The past is a different country. They do things differently there.
Yeah.
Because even just 20 years ago, we did things differently then.
Right.
And so to go so far into the past or the future, you might not even speak the language the right way. So I like that they refer to it as a different world or her world, and the only way we can get to her is by tricking her using the various mechanics of sorcerousness and succession and Ellone's power to time travel, sort of.
Right. And one last time, I guess I'll just say, I think some of that could be made clearer. I like some of the muddiness of it. I think just spending more time on it could have been interesting.
So even after all that explanation, Laguna says, I'm not quite sure I understand all this, but we know the plan. It's to save the cheerleaders, save the world.
Yeah.
We know what to do. We're going to do the thing. Is everyone on board? And Rinoa's got the biggest part of it. So he asks her at some point, Rinoa, are you good with this?
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's like, you got it. I'm all in. Let's do it. And then he says that he's always wanted to ride the Ragnarok because the name's so cool.
Big nerd. The dragon, this is cool.
So Laguna, he essentially reiterates what we all just read, but more briefly. We're going to get on board the lunatic Pandora, rescue Ellone, kill Adele, let Rinoa be possessed, go back in time, bring time together, kill Ultimecia. Ready, go. And then he does this thing that I love.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how he knows how to survive time compression, but he does.
Yeah.
And here's what he says.
Right.
There is only one way to make yourself exist in a world like that. As friends. Don't forget one another. As friends, believe in one another. Believe in your friend's existence, and they'll also believe in yours. To be friends, to like one another, and to love one another. You can't do these things alone. You are not alone, Zidane. Oh, sorry, wrong game.
Right.
You need somebody. What place reminds you of your friends? Oh, a place. There might be a specific place.
Filled with flowers or something.
Imagine being in that place with all of your friends. Once time compression begins, think of that place and try to get there. That place will welcome you. You'll be able to get there no matter what period you're in. You'll need love and friendship for this mission and the courage to believe in it. It's all about love, friendship, and courage. And Kefka would say, you sound like entries from a self-help pamphlet.
Yeah. I was going to say that it's all about love, friendship, and courage could be the tagline for every Final Fantasy game, Laguna.
Yeah.
You could just put that as a Final Fantasy. It's all about love, friendship, and courage.
And I love that.
Yeah. Of course you do.
Especially, hey,
You're right. Yeah,
especially for a guy like Squall, who this whole time has had a hard time connecting with his emotions, or Cloud, because he's had his brain fried, having a hard time connecting with his emotions, or Terra, because she had the slave crown on her head, has a hard time connecting with her emotions. Understanding your emotions, being able to handle them, and understanding how you connect to other people is extraordinarily important. And for all the other craziness going on in this story, as Laguna tells us, we may not understand all that, but the important part is love, friendship, and courage. And that's what's going to get us through this weird time compression thing, or the 2,000-year time loop, or the tree of evil souls
stuff,
or the cloud of darkness, or whatever it might be.
And then there's this last little bit that I really love. The entire party leaves, except for Squall and Laguna are standing there on the deck of the ship. And Squall turns to him and says, love and friendship, and all the friends we made along the way and all that. It sounds a little corny, dude, but I don't know, everyone seems up for it. Which is interesting because, as you were saying, this is still at this late stage of the game. Even after he's left into space, Squall is still learning this lesson. And these are the two sides of his natural reaction is still, oh, that's cringe if this was 2024. Ugh. But, man, everyone's buying it. And then Laguna turns to him and shows a little bit of self-doubt and says, I don't know, you think it'll succeed? And then Squall gets to go, you know what? We're going to give it a try. And I love that dynamic that now they both get to wear each other's hats. No, either one of them wears hats. Right, but Laguna shows that bit of self-doubt, like, I don't know, man, you think this is going to work? And Squall has to, as much as Laguna's going to be the one who's going to give the rising speech, because Squall couldn't even manage a let's mosey. Let's be honest with ourselves. Right. Squall is not going to give a rousing speech to the troops. But here in this moment, he is going to say, we have to try. That's it for this episode. Yeah, it was a short one, but happy holidays to everyone, and thanks for listening. Reach out to us on the social medias for anything that we got wrong, missed, or should have mentioned. And this really does set us up for the end game, so hopefully you can join us next time when we conclude the plot of Final Fantasy VIII.